For Mohamed Bazoum, July 26th started as a typical day. He had breakfast at his residence. This was located inside Niamey's presidential palace. From there, Bazoum was heading to his office. That's when he noticed something was off. Soldiers of his powerful presidential guard, General Abdurrahman Tiani, had surrounded his office. The president quickly hurried to the safe room. He was there for several hours. But when no one came to rescue him, the situation became clear. Bazoum had been overthrown by the very people who were supposed to protect his office. Niger's military regime now want to prosecute Bazoum. They accuse him of high treason.
In any event, the government of Niger has to date gathered the necessary evidence to prosecute before the competent national and international authorities the ousted president and his local and foreign accomplices for high treason and undermining the internal and external security of Niger, following his exchanges with the nationals of foreign heads of state and heads of international organizations.
Bazoum and his family are held at the official residence. He has contact with the outside world, but international concern over his detention is mounting. Bazoum is reported to have lost a worrying amount of weight, while his 20-year-old son was reportedly denied care. Bazoum's daughter says her family had no clean water or electricity and was living on some rice and pasta. The West has called for Bazoum to be released immediately, but the junta remained defiant. Now, the coup may have taken the world by shock, but those in Niger say it was a long time coming. It was the result of a feud between President Bazoum and his chief guard, General Abdurrahman Tiani. Bazoum took power in 2021. It was Niger's first democratic transfer of power. Bazoum succeeded Mahamadou Issoufou, who stepped down after a decade in power. Issoufou may have stepped down, but he's a towering political figure in West Africa and continues to retain enormous influence in Niger. Bazoum considered Issoufou his political godfather, but when he took power, Bazoum was eager to chart his own course, to emerge from the shadows of his predecessor. Thus began a power struggle. Bazoum began to stamp his authority on Niger. He sidelined a number of senior officials, both in the military and public administration. He reinforced military cooperation with both France and the United States, curbed the autonomy of Niger's army commanders, and launched anti-corruption programs. These programs targeted some of Issoufou's protégés. So clearly, Bazoum made a lot of enemies, and it was this assertive drive that became his Achilles heel. The trouble started when Bazoum interfered with the presidential guard. He curtailed its strength and then started to scrutinize its budget. The head of the guard was General Abdurrahman Tiani. He was also the head of Issoufou's guard. He helped stop a coup right before Bazoum's election. And when Bazoum took over, he stayed on as the chief guard. But Tiani feared he was next for the chop. He was desperate to save his skin, so he turned on his boss. He told a few select commanders about his plan, made sure other branches would not oppose him, and then struck when the time was right. Reports suggest that Issoufou knew about Tiani's plans. Apparently, the former president contacted Tiani the next morning of the coup. He even offered to serve as mediator. Reports suggest that he met with Bazoum. Sources say he shared Bazoum's impression that Tiani had succumbed to a mood swing. Now, Issoufou hasn't commented on any of this. But on July 30th, the former president broke his silence. He said he was the mediator between the two sides, calling for Mohamed Bazoum to be reinstated. This is Niger's fifth coup in 50 years. The coup may have triggered an international outcry, yet citizens say the change is a breath of fresh air. Bazoum remains popular as a Western ally, but in Niamey, which is Niger's capital, there is often a different view. People here are either disappointed by him or bitter about his presidency. Others blame cronyism, corruption, and insecurity.
If there was high treason, he is the one who has committed the biggest betrayal. You really cannot spare him. The military has seen it all, and there really has to be justice. There has to be justice because without justice, there can be no forgiveness.
Today, what we are going through is not a witch hunt, because even when you look at the army itself, let's face it, is not all holy. But they themselves are obliged to work together today, and should do so for the good of Niger and a bright future for the country.
However, the question is whether Tiani will change things. The junta says it wants to safeguard Niger, blaming the government for security problems. But while the people may be tolerating their rule, they face opposition from neighboring nations, mainly the ECOWAS, which is the West African bloc. ECOWAS threatened military action to reverse the coup, but has so far failed to follow through on its threat. So, will the junta meet force with force, or is diplomacy the way forward for Niger? Only time will tell.